Our next presenter is going to describe an analytic methodology she's been developing with the Alaska Center for Energy and Power, Haley McIntyre.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for that introduction. First of all, I don't want to take credit actually for developing this methodology myself. This was actually a part of a team effort that I was fortunate enough to be a student intern that worked on. So as Ethan had said, I'm from the Alaska Center for Energy and Power. I'm a student researcher there, and I'm also attending the University of Alaska Fairbanks and working on my master's program. So first of all, I just want to lay out the objectives for this presentation today. First of all, I'd like to present a tool that we believe can be useful for conducting a broad market analysis. This tool can be easily adapted to different situations and perhaps can be useful for yourself. Secondly, we'd like to demonstrate the global relevance not just of Arctic resources, but of Arctic experience. To this point, we'd like to acknowledge the role model that Iceland has been for us in Alaska. Iceland's an example of somewhere that has taken advantage of their local circumstances to become experts in geothermal energy development. And this is an expertise they are now sharing all around the world. And third, I'm hoping to open up a dialogue about building on common experiences. So just to provide a little bit of context, I'm sure from some of the other presentations that have gone on during this summit, you are familiar with some of the challenges that we face doing energy development in rural Alaska. First of all, these places are remote, even by Alaska standards. The community shown here is Nome, which is about 550 miles from either of our population centers. Add on top of that the 2,000 miles it takes to get goods from the lower 48 up there, or the continental U.S., as may be more familiar. Further, these road systems are confined just to routes between Anchorage and Fairbanks, with rural areas only available to be served by boat or plane. All these issues are compounded by the challenging geographic conditions. We have multiple mountain ranges, several rivers, lakes, permafrost, and of course the famous Arctic weather. As a result of this situation, extending roads and grid transmission systems has been expensive and challenging. As such, these rural communities are now reliant on islanded microgrids, which are powered by diesel generation. So the motivation for this project is, in recent years, Alaska has seen a big growth in microgrids that are serviced by a hybrid combination, integrating technologies like wind, geothermal, biomass, and even solar onto these hybrid grids. Currently, this is underway in approximately 60 communities, or 1/3 of rural Alaska. This change is owed in a large part to efforts taken by the Alaska State Legislature, who has established the Renewable Energy Fund as well as the Emerging Energy Technology Fund and continue to be supportive of these efforts. However, as the share of renewable resources increases on these grids, there are new challenges that are faced. Notably, the competing objectives of optimizing generation from multiple sources and the fact that microgrids frequently experience large load swings in relation to the total load. To be better equipped at handling in-state needs, it has become crucial to seek out those with whom we can share similar experiences. Obviously, this isn't something most of the U.S. is very familiar with. So although this is unique in the U.S., we felt confident that if we looked abroad, we would be able to find places with diesel-based microgrids that are also attempting to integrate local energy resources. The task then became to find a way to systematically identify these regions and build relationships with them, the goal of which would be to share information as well as possibly relevant products and services. The first step to accomplish this has been to conduct an international market analysis. To do this, we employed a tool that has allowed us to evaluate a large number of countries in a multidimensional way. And by multidimensional, we're referring not just to the geographic conditions, but also the political circumstances and economic factors in the areas. I'm about to describe the 5-step methodology that we went through to do this. The first of those steps was to define this ideal market, or these areas that we thought our relations could be compatible. Second was to identify criteria that would serve as indicators so that we might be able to locate these markets. Third, we applied a scoring system to these criteria so that we could create a ranking system in order to differentiate between them. Fourth, we selected countries for the review of this process. And finally, we ran these countries through a series of 3 different filters in order to reveal a top 5 countries that we would conduct a further market analysis on. The nickname that we have given this is the gap matrix. So as I said, we started doing this by identifying what our ideal market would look like. In addition to finding conditions that resemble rural Alaska, such as low population densities, long supply lines, and microgrids relying on imported diesel, we were also looking for the political, economic, and regulatory environment that was there for potential for market-driven technology implementation. In defining these criteria, we had 4 requirements. 1, we wanted them to reveal a correlation with our ideal market. 2, we were hoping they would reveal differences in between these countries. 3, they needed to be easily quantifiable. Even if not expressed in numeric terms, we wanted to express them in a simple phrase like present or absent, yes or no. And 4, criteria were preferable if data could be assembled for a large number of countries from a single credible source. Our interest in doing this was to ensure that the years the data was compiled from would be the same as well as the procurement methods. In addition to using quantitative data, we also used some qualitative analysis. But to avoid creating our own qualitative judgments, we turned to work that was combined by other credible sources. Shown here, I have an example of one of these qualitative analysis. In phase 3, we looked at what the business environment would look like in these different countries, whether it was supportive or not at facilitating market entry. To do this, we turned to the World Bank's Doing Business rankings, which analyzed data indicating the complexity and cost of the regulatory environment, as well as the strength of their legal institutions. The next step was to create a scoring system through which we could create these ranked lists. We assigned a value to each criteria based on the Likert scale of 1 to 5. 1 saying it was a low importance, and 5 saying this was a very high importance one. The top chart showed there is an example of 3 of the criteria we used in phase 1. As you can see, we have some marked as a 5, some as a 4, and some as a 3. Given these values, we then determined a scoring range for each of these criteria. The range used the assigned value to dictate the maximum number of points that could be awarded. So for instance, the first one, emerging economy, we thought that was a really important criteria. So if a country was able to meet that, which we use the IMF's 2012 list for, they received 5 points for that. If it wasn't met because it was of such high importance, they received 0 points. For the most part, though, countries received half of the possible points available if they were unable to satisfy a criteria, as is demonstrated by the population density. And finally, on some, we create a full range, a spectrum of scores that could be possible from 1 to 3, such as with GDP. So given that this program was actually a part of a summer internship, we had 8 weeks to compile all the data and analyze these results. So therefore, given our limited time frame, we had to kind of narrow down the countries that we were going to choose for our analysis. A total of 100 countries and territories ended up being evaluated. We selected these by conducting a literature review of international reports on emerging energy markets, such as the IEA's World Energy Outlook. We then supplemented that list with some regional selections, just to make sure we had as comprehensive a look as possible. And finally, we talked to different stakeholders and saw if there was any particular countries or regions that they were really interested in learning about, and we incorporated those on the list as well. So to crystallize what all this looks like, I have here a snapshot of that evaluation tool, which looks really big on that screen. So as you can see, we have the criteria listed there along the top, and then their score is given after each criteria, just a basic Excel spreadsheet with the formulas plugged in. And then on the very right-hand side, you see the total score, which was the score they received for that phase. Each country carried along their score into the next level of filters. We did, however, begin to systematically limit the number of countries based on how they scored to carry them on to the other filters. This was done, 1, because if they were unable to satisfy some of the basic similarities, we didn't see need to further evaluate them, and 2, to go along with those time constraints of evaluation. This image shows our top 5 scoring countries from the entire matrix results. It was really interesting to see the diversity of countries that were involved. The number 1 score was actually South Africa. Number 2 was Vanuatu. 3 was Chile. 4 was Senegal. And 5 was Mongolia. These results are further analyzed in a map that was created as well. This map shows all of the countries that we analyzed throughout the entire matrix. Those countries which are in bright green are the ones that scored highest in phase 1, and it begins to melt into this bright red, orangish color as they scored lower and lower. The countries with the green stars are those that made it through phase 2, and those are the gold stars of the top 5 scorers overall. If you're interested in checking out this map, we actually have it online. Using the online version, you can hold your mouse over each country and it'll show you their final score. So overall, as a first-order assessment, we were pleased with the results. However, a complete appraisal of this methodology will be withheld until we complete our in-depth analysis on the 5 top-scoring countries. There are obviously some strengths and some weaknesses to this methodology that we used. The first strength that we found was surprises. We already knew about similarities with nations like Canada and Australia and other partners we've been working with. We were really hoping this tool would direct us to unexplored areas and places we hadn't really considered before, and it definitely succeeded at doing that. It was obvious that Africa was in need of electrification, but the degree to which their political and economic institutions were compatible with our ideal market was quite surprising. Further, one of our staff members had actually done his Peace Corps involvement on Vanuatu, so to see that turn up so high in our results was actually pretty exciting. The second strength was it was able to filter out unrelated nations. In order to test the accuracy of the filters themselves, we included countries that we didn't think would have very much relationship. For instance, those that are really small with a high population density, that already have very well integrated grids, or countries that are very rich in their own oil resources and have low cost of power. And as we saw at the end of phase 1, most of those countries ended up at the very bottom. 3, we're glad to see that there was a broad range of possibilities. In our top 5 alone, we have Africa, South America, Asia, and the South Pacific present. So we had a feeling that this microgrid integration experience would be relevant in a wide variety of places, but this just kind of reaffirmed that. There were, however, some major challenges, chief among those being regional challenges. This became apparent when countries like Canada didn't score very high. But when we analyzed it further, by looking at a country's data, it's really hard to find these regional pockets. For instance, if you're looking at data about the US, you're probably not going to find the unique situations that are present in rural Alaska. Second, we did have some issues with cohesion of data. When you're using multiple resources for one particular criteria, there's different years that are employed. To the extent possible, we tried to make sure everything was from beyond 2010, but there were some limitations. Further, we did have some unavailable data. We searched and searched, but for some countries, we just couldn't find certain information. The most interesting thing that came out of this was it was actually territories and quasi-independent states that were most difficult to locate data on. We believe this is because they were ignored in the larger energy reports for international markets because they're not a country, and because they're a territory, they didn't quite get covered. Like in the U.S. reports, they discuss the U.S. states, but they don't talk about American Samoa or the Northern Marianas, for instance. So just a little bit of brief information. As we started some of these case studies, I started to explore the country of Senegal. And as these have started, it's already noticed very many parallels. For instance, they have had rapid electrification. Since the year 2000, their electrification rate was 8%, and now it's up to 38%. They also have comparable village sizes. Over 70% of their rural communities have less than 500 people, which is very common in Alaska as well. They also have a lot of national and international programs that are focused on energy development and are very reliant on imported oil. If you're not counting biomass, they are 90% reliant on oil for their energy needs. But beyond just the integration expertise, we found other comparisons that we weren't expecting to find. For instance, on the island of Vanuatu, as they have increased their electrification, they've had to increase their needs for diesel storage. They were just using like small drums in order to transport these between islands, but as the sector has grown, they've needed to try to get into bulk energy storage, which is something that you can see by the image of Gamble, Alaska, that we're very familiar with as well. So in conclusion, I would just like to say thank you for your attention, and if you're interested in discussing any of your own experiences working in some of these nations or some other ones that you think would be relevant, I would love to hear about that. So thank you very much.